My name's Everly. I'm 32 years old. And last year, my aunt dragged me into court claiming I owed her $50,000 for raising me. What she didn't expect was that I had proof, hidden for decades, that told the real story. Proof that would leave her speechless. Before I share how everything unfolded, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama, betrayal, and emotional courage. The first time I opened that old cardboard box, I wasn't looking for secrets. I was just trying to clean out the attic after years of avoiding it. The dust swirled in the air like tiny ghosts, and the wooden boards creaked under my weight as if warning me not to disturb what had been buried there. But tucked between broken photo frames and faded Christmas decorations, I found it a small, tattered notebook with my own handwriting on the cover. My heart sank the second I recognized it. It was my childhood journal. I hadn't seen it in more than 20 years, not since the days when I was a scared little girl living under my aunt's roof. For a moment, I thought about shoving it back into the box and pretending I never found it, but curiosity won. With trembling fingers, I flipped it open, and the first line nearly stopped my breath. Today, Aunt Linda yelled at me again. I ate crackers for dinner. I'm still hungry, but she says I should be grateful. I froze. Reading those words was like being pulled into a time machine, thrown back into nights when I lay awake in bed, clutching my stomach, wishing my mom and dad were still alive. Back then, after the car accident that took my parents, Aunt Linda had taken me in. At least, that's how she told the story for years, that she had sacrificed her life to raise me. People praised her for stepping up, calling her selfless, calling her strong. But the reality written in those pages was far different from the story she loved to tell. The deeper I read, the darker it became. She locked the fridge again tonight. I could hear her kids eating pizza downstairs, but she told me I'd had enough. I asked if I could go to the school field trip, but she said no. She said it costs too much. But I saw her buying new shoes for herself today. Page after page. The little girl version of me had poured out feelings I couldn't say out loud at the time. Hunger, loneliness, fear. There were doodles of houses with bars on the windows, drawings of myself standing alone in the rain. I closed the journal for a second and sat still in the attic, my chest rising and falling fast. The silence around me pressed heavy on my ears. I remembered how quiet those nights had been. Too quiet. No bedtime stories, no gentle hugs, no good job after school. Just silence that felt louder than any noise. And in that silence, I had learned not to cry. I learned early that tears only made Aunt Linda angrier. She hated weakness. Or at least that's what she called it. But reading those pages, I realized I wasn't weak. I was surviving. I was a child trying to make sense of a world that had snatched away her parents and left her at the mercy of a woman who cared more about appearances than about love. One entry hit me harder than the rest. It's Christmas Eve. Everyone has gifts under the tree. Not me. She said my presence was enough of a gift, and I should be thankful. I remembered that Christmas. I had sat there, watching my cousins tear open shiny wrapping paper, while I tried to smile and act like I didn't care. I even clapped for them, though inside I felt like I was shrinking smaller and smaller. Back then, I thought maybe it was normal. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe I didn't deserve more. But as an adult, reading those words, I realized the truth. Aunt Linda had rewritten history to make herself look like a hero, while I had been just another burden in her eyes. The more I read, the angrier I grew, not just at her, but at myself for believing her version of events for so long. She had repeated the same lines for years. I gave up my life for you. You owe me everything. Without me, you'd have nothing. I had swallowed those words like medicine, even when they tasted like poison. But The journal told a different story. A story where I was the child left out, overlooked, and dismissed. A story where sacrifices weren't made for me, they were made at my expense. I closed the book again and pressed it against my chest. My eyes burned, but no tears fell. Instead, I felt a strange calm, like the quiet before a storm. Because I knew in that moment the journal wasn't just a forgotten relic from childhood. It was proof. Proof of the things Aunt Linda always denied. Proof of the nights I went hungry. Proof of the times she spent money on herself, but claimed there was nothing left for me, and I had no idea just how soon I would need it. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Aunt Linda. Her voice was sharp, impatient, the same tone she'd always used when talking to me. "Everly," she said, "we need to talk. You're 32 now. You've had your education, your life, all because I took you in, and I think it's time you paid me back. $50,000 should do it." I nearly dropped the phone. 50,000? For what? For years of cold meals, locked doors, and empty stockings? For making me feel like an outsider in the only home I had left? But she didn't stop there. She went on about how she had sacrificed everything, how her life had been ruined because of me. I didn't argue. Not then. I just let her talk. Because as she went on, I realized something powerful. I had the truth now. The truth written in a little notebook that she had no idea even existed. And though I didn't know it yet, that truth would be the very thing to expose her lies, right in front of a judge. The phone call ended, but her words didn't. They lingered in my ears long after the screen went dark. $50,000. She had said it so casually, as if it were a bill I had forgotten to pay. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the journal lying in front of me. My fingers traced the worn edges. How could she still twist things after all these years? My phone buzzed again, this time a message from her. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Everly, family takes care of family. You owe me." The word, burned in my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the living room, thinking about every time Aunt Linda had told me I should be grateful. She had fed me, clothed me, given me a place to live. Her words, not mine. But my memories told a different story. The empty fridge, the hand-me-downs 2 sizes too big, the nights spent wishing someone would just tell me I mattered. Still, part of me wondered if maybe she believed her own lies. Maybe in her mind, she had sacrificed everything. Or maybe she just wanted money the same way she always wanted control. By morning, I decided I wouldn't respond. Not yet. But ignoring her didn't make her disappear. The next week, I got a call from my cousin Marcy, her daughter. "Everly," she said, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "Mom's been telling everyone you're refusing to pay her back. She says she gave up her whole life for you, and now you're turning your back on her." I nearly laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was almost too much to process. "Marcy, you live there too?" I said carefully. "You know what it was really like?" She hesitated. "I know, but Mom, she tells people things in a way that makes them believe her. She's been saying you're ungrateful, that you've forgotten everything she did. And do you believe that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. A long pause, then a sigh. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Her words stung more than I expected. I wanted Marcy to defend me, to say she remembered the truth. But instead, she left me dangling in doubt. Later that day, I stopped by the grocery store. As I pushed my cart down the aisle, I caught sight of Mrs. Donnelly, a neighbor from my childhood. She gave me a polite smile, then leaned in close. "Everly, I heard about your aunt's situation," she whispered. "She's been telling people you're refusing to repay her. After all she did for you, well, I just hope you'll do the right thing." Her tone wasn't cruel, but it carried judgment. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I wanted to shout, to tell her about the journal, about the nights of hunger, about the Christmas mornings with nothing under the tree. But instead, I forced a tight smile and nodded, pushing my cart away. That's when it hit me. Aunt Linda wasn't just demanding money. She was building a narrative, shaping me into the villain before anyone even heard my side. A few nights later, I got another call from her, this one shorter, colder. "You have until the end of the month," she snapped. "If I don't see a check, I'll take this to court. And don't think anyone will side with you. Everyone knows the truth. Everly." The truth. Her version of it. Anyway, I hung up before she could say more, but my hands shook for hours afterward. Not out of fear of losing money, but because I could already see the trap she was setting. She wasn't just rewriting history. She was recruiting witnesses. I decided to confide in someone I trusted, my old high school friend, Rachel. We sat in a diner booth, the hum of conversations around us making it easier to speak. "She wants $50,000. I told her. She says I owe it to her for raising me." Rachel's eyes widened. "That's insane. Everly, she didn't raise you out of love. She raised you out of obligation. And let's be honest, half the time she treated you like you didn't belong." Her words lifted a weight off my shoulders. For once, someone saw it clearly. "Yeah, but she's telling everyone the opposite," I admitted, "and people believe her." Rachel leaned forward. "Then you need to tell your story. Don't let her paint you as the villain. You've got proof, right? That journal you told me about." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I just don't know if I'm ready to let everyone see it." Rachel's voice softened. "Maybe it's time. You deserve to be heard." Days blurred into weeks, each one heavier than the last. The pressure from family grew. A cousin posted a vague comment on Facebook about people forgetting their roots. An uncle left me a voicemail, urging me to make things right with Linda before it gets ugly. Everywhere I turned, it felt like her voice was louder than mine. One evening, I came home from work to find an envelope tucked under my door. Inside was a handwritten note. "Pay her what she deserves, or you'll regret this. Family doesn't forget." I didn't recognize the handwriting. Maybe it was one of her friends, maybe even one of my cousins. Either way, it made my stomach twist. The breaking point came when I attended a small family barbecue, hoping to keep the peace. As soon as I arrived, the air shifted. Conversations hushed, eyes turned. Aunt Linda stood near the grill, holding a glass of iced tea, like a queen at her throne. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Our little Everly, too good to remember who raised her." I froze. Heat crawled up my neck, and for a moment I wanted to leave. But something in me pushed back. "I remember plenty," I said, steadying my voice. "Maybe not the things you like to brag about, but I remember." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Murmurs spread through the yard, whispers carrying faster than the smoke from the grill. Linda's smile tightened. "Careful what you say, dear. People know the truth." But as I looked around, I noticed something. Not everyone was nodding. A few cousins avoided my eyes. Marcy bit her lip, looking away. Maybe, just maybe, cracks were forming in her perfect story. That night, I drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I had spent my whole life swallowing her lies, letting her rewrite the past. But no more. The journal wasn't just proof. It was my voice. The voice of the little girl who had been silenced for too long. If Aunt Linda wanted a fight, I was done playing by her rules. Because this time, the truth was on my side. I drove home in a daze, the journal still resting on the passenger seat like a fragile piece of evidence I couldn't yet believe was real. The streetlights blurred past, as though the world outside was moving faster than I could process. Every beat of my heart felt heavier, louder, like it was echoing through the car. For years, I had stayed quiet, letting my aunt's words weigh me down, letting her rewrite the story of my life. But now, for the first time, I had something she couldn't twist into her version of the truth. When I stepped inside my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights right away. I just sank onto the couch and placed the journal on my lap. Its edges were frayed, the ink smudged in places, but every page was mine. My handwriting, my voice, my pain, it was all there. I traced my finger across the cover, as if it might crumble if I pressed too hard. A part of me wanted to keep it tucked away, safe from the possibility of rejection or dismissal in court. What if no one cared about the words of a scared child? What if it didn't matter? Still, I knew I couldn't go into this fight unprepared. My aunt wasn't the type to back down, not when she believed money was at stake. She had twisted family dinners into battlegrounds and turned my silence into ammunition. Facing her in a courtroom meant she'd come armed with lies polished to sound like truths. If I was going to survive this, I needed someone who could help me untangle her web and stand firmly by my side. The next morning, after a night of restless tossing and turning, I picked up my phone and dialed a number that felt both terrifying and necessary. An attorney recommended by a co-worker who'd once gone through a bitter family dispute. My voice shook slightly when I introduced myself. "My name is Everly," I said, "and I need help with a family case." The lawyer, Mr. Grant, had a calmness about him that immediately steadied me. His tone was measured, almost reassuring, like someone who had seen storms like mine before. "Why don't you come in," he suggested, "and bring anything you think might help us understand your situation." Walking into his office a few hours later felt like stepping into another world. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with neatly arranged legal volumes, and the faint smell of coffee lingered in the air. I clutched the journal tightly to my chest, as though it were my lifeline. He gestured for me to sit, and I carefully placed the journal on his desk. "This," I said quietly, "is everything she doesn't want anyone to know." He flipped through a few pages, nodding slowly. "Childhood journals can be powerful," he murmured. "They don't just tell a story. They reveal patterns, emotions, details that can be very difficult to fabricate after the fact. Combined with your testimony, this could be compelling." Hearing him say that made my throat tighten. For so long, I'd wondered if my words even mattered, if anyone would believe me over her rehearsed speeches. Now, someone was looking at my handwriting and calling it evidence. But Mr. Grant wasn't naive. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Your aunt will come prepared. She'll likely try to paint you as ungrateful, irresponsible, or even manipulative. We need to anticipate her angles and dismantle them piece by piece." The thought made my stomach twist. I had lived through her accusations before, but the idea of hearing them laid out formally in a courtroom was another weight entirely. I imagined her sharp voice rising, her practiced indignation, and the way she'd lock eyes with the judge as though daring anyone to doubt her. Over the next hour, we mapped out the strategy. Mr. Grant asked detailed questions. When did the first accusations of debt begin? Did she ever put anything in writing? Were there witnesses to her claims? For every answer, I dug into my memories, reliving moments I'd tried hard to bury. The time she pulled me aside at Thanksgiving and hissed about how much I owed her, while smiling sweetly to everyone else. The nights I overheard her on the phone, telling relatives how she sacrificed everything for me, twisting half-truths into her own brand of heroism. Each story left me drained, but also lighter. For once, I wasn't just carrying them alone. I was laying them out piece by piece for someone who understood how to use them. When I left his office, the air outside felt sharper, clearer. I held the journal close, not just as a record of the past, but as a weapon of truth. I knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, nothing involving her ever was, but I finally felt like I had footing on the battlefield. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and went through old boxes, searching for anything that might strengthen my case. Receipts, photos, letters, small pieces of a life that, when put together, painted a bigger picture. Each item brought back a memory, sometimes bittersweet, sometimes painful. A school photo with my forced smile, a note from a teacher praising my perseverance, an old birthday card signed by my aunt with a backhanded comment scribbled at the bottom. Alone, they seemed insignificant, but together they told a story. As I spread everything out on the table, I felt an unexpected surge of determination. My aunt had built her narrative on control, on silencing me whenever I tried to speak. But in court, she couldn't mute me. She couldn't erase the ink on the pages of my journal. In the quiet of my apartment, I whispered to myself, almost like a promise, this time, she won't win. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Meetings with Mr. Grant became routine, each session sharpening the outline of our case. He taught me how to answer questions without letting emotions overwhelm me, how to pause before speaking, so my words carried weight. He explained the importance of body language, of looking steady even when I felt unsteady inside. I practiced in front of a mirror, sometimes stumbling over my words, sometimes breaking down when memories surfaced too vividly. But each time I got back up. Each time I reminded myself that I wasn't just fighting for money, I was fighting for my own truth. At night, sleep came in fragments. I'd wake to the sound of my own heartbeat, replaying imaginary courtroom scenes in my mind. My aunt's voice echoed in those dreams, sharp and cutting, but always met with silence when I tried to respond. Then I'd reach for the journal on my nightstand, flipping to a random page, grounding myself in the words I'd once written in secret. As the court date drew closer, the tension in my chest grew heavier. Yet so did my resolve. The girl who had once scribbled her pain in the quiet of her room was no longer voiceless. She was preparing to step into the light, to let her words be heard not just as memories but as testimony. And though fear still clung to me like a shadow, I knew one thing for certain. Silence would no longer be my inheritance. I was ready for the battle ahead. The morning of the hearing arrived with a chill that clung to my skin, even though the calendar claimed spring had already arrived. My alarm buzzed far earlier than necessary, but I had barely slept anyway. The weight of the day pressed down on me the moment I opened my eyes. This wasn't another rehearsal in my head, another conversation with Mr. Grant, or another late-night practice in front of the mirror. This was real. Today, everything would be laid bare before a judge. I dressed slowly, carefully choosing a simple navy dress and a cardigan that made me feel steady. My hands trembled as I buttoned it, not from cold, but from the swirl of emotions boiling inside me. Fear, determination, even a strange flicker of hope. I held my journal close, sliding it into my bag, as though it were the most valuable possession I owned. In many ways, it was. Mr. Grant met me outside the courthouse. His calm presence was like a grounding cord, though the marble steps behind him looked impossibly tall. He gave me a reassuring nod. "You're ready," he said, his tone leaving no space for doubt. "I don't feel ready," I admitted, my voice tight. "That's because this matters to you," he replied. "And that's exactly why the truth will come through." Inside, the courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. The walls echoed with footsteps, the kind that reminded me no one came here for anything light. We walked down a long corridor, and I caught sight of my aunt standing with her attorney near the courtroom doors. She wore a tailored suit, her hair pinned perfectly, her expression already arranged into one of dignified confidence. When her eyes met mine, there was no flicker of warmth, just the familiar sharpness, as if this were another chance to prove her superiority. The bailiff's voice broke the silence. Court is now in session. The room itself was smaller than I expected, intimate in a way that made every sound magnified. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and silver-streaked hair, settled into her seat. She scanned the room with the kind of gaze that seemed to slice through pretense. I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of every beat of my heart. My aunt's attorney began with a polished opening, painting her as a selfless caretaker who had poured years of sacrifice into raising me, now unjustly denied what was rightfully owed. He spoke smoothly, his words dripping with practiced conviction. At one point, he gestured toward me as if I were a figure in his narrative rather than a person with a voice. My aunt nodded along, her expression carefully controlled, though every so often her eyes flicked toward me, sharp and cold. Then it was our turn. Mr. Grant rose, his voice steady but firm. Your Honor, the truth here isn't buried in contracts or formal agreements. It's in the lived experiences of my client, in the reality of her childhood, and in the written words that survived it. He placed my journal gently on the table, his hand resting on it as if to anchor the moment. My stomach clenched. This was it, the moment my private pain stepped into the light. The judge leaned forward. We'll hear from the plaintiff first, she said, her gaze settling on me. I stood slowly, my legs heavy but determined. Walking to the witness stand felt like crossing a stage where the entire room waited for me to stumble. The clerk swore me in, and the oath echoed in my ears. To tell the truth, the whole truth. My voice was quiet but steady when I said, I do. At first, Mr. Grant guided me with gentle questions. He asked about my childhood, my memories, and the role my aunt played. Speaking aloud about those years felt strange, as though I were peeling back wallpaper to expose the cracks beneath. My throat tightened when I described nights spent in silence, the way I scribbled feelings into my journal because speaking them aloud was never safe. Why didn't you talk to anyone at the time? He asked softly. I swallowed, my voice trembling, because every time I tried, I was told I was ungrateful, that I owed everything to her. I believed it for a long time. Gasps whispered through the courtroom, quiet but unmistakable. My aunt shifted in her seat, her carefully constructed mask tightening. Then came the moment I feared most, presenting the journal. Mr. Grant lifted it gently and handed it to me. Can you identify this? My fingers brushed the worn cover. It's my journal, I said, my voice cracking slightly. I wrote in it when I was a child. He asked me to read a passage, one chosen not for drama, but for raw truth. My eyes blurred as I stared at the words I had written so many years ago. I don't think she loves me. She tells everyone she gave me everything, but she only reminds me of what I owe her. I feel like a bill, not a person. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge's pen, which had been tapping lightly, stilled. Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't look away from the page. For the first time, I let those words breathe beyond the walls of my bedroom. When I glanced up, I saw my aunt's jaw tighten. Her hands clasped too tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Her attorney tried to object, arguing the journal was the emotional ramblings of a child, but the judge raised her hand. Emotions are not irrelevant when the claim is built on personal sacrifice. The court will allow it. A ripple of relief spread through me, though the battle was far from over. Cross-examination began, and my aunt's attorney wasted no time. His tone sharpened as he asked, Isn't it true that your aunt provided you with a home when no one else would? Yes, I said carefully, my voice steady, but that doesn't mean I owe her $50,000. He pressed harder, trying to trip me up with leading questions, painting me as someone twisting stories for financial escape. My palms grew sweaty, but each time I reminded myself I had lived this. He was just reciting. Finally, my aunt herself took the stand. She spoke with conviction, her voice rising as she listed every meal, every ride, every piece of clothing she had ever given me. She wove it into a narrative of martyrdom, painting herself as the savior who had been repaid with betrayal. But cracks showed. When Mr. Grant asked simple questions, did she ever write down this debt? Did she ever mention it to other relatives in a formal way? Her answers faltered. Well, no, but it was understood, she insisted, her tone sharpening. The judge's gaze remained steady, her pen moving slowly across her notes. As the day stretched on, the tension built until the air itself felt heavy. Every word spoken was another stone placed on the scales of truth. I sat there, clutching my trembling hands together, watching years of silence unravel in front of strangers. And yet, for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. When the judge finally called for a recess, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs. I stepped outside, the sunlight almost blinding after the dim wood-paneled walls. My chest rose and fell quickly, but beneath the nerves was something else, something that felt dangerously close to freedom. Because no matter what happened next, the truth had finally been spoken aloud. The gavel's final strike echoed like thunder through the courtroom, though the judge's voice was calm and measured. The plaintiff's claim is hereby dismissed. No financial obligation exists. Furthermore, this court advises caution against misrepresentation of familial responsibilities as financial debts. I froze, the words sinking into me like warm sunlight after years of winter. Dismissed. No debt. No chains. The air seemed to shift, almost as though the entire room exhaled at once. My knees wobbled, but I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. The journal, my journal, sat there in front of me like a battle-worn ally. I wanted to clutch it to my chest, whisper thanks into its worn pages, but instead I simply closed it gently with reverence. I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch my aunt's face. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For once, she was silent, not because she chose to be, but because there was nothing left for her to twist, no lies left to spin. Her attorney leaned close, whispering something hurriedly, but she didn't respond. Her eyes burned into me, sharp, wounded, furious, but there was also something else there. Defeat. Mr. Grant leaned toward me. His voice was low, calm. It's over, Everly. Over. The word tasted strange on my tongue, like freedom I wasn't sure I deserved. When the judge exited, people began shuffling toward the door, but I stayed seated, unwilling to let go of the stillness that wrapped around me. For the first time in years, the weight pressing down on my chest was gone. Outside the courtroom, the hallway hummed with footsteps and murmurs. My aunt moved quickly past me, not sparing a single word, her heels clicking like the final beats of a fading song. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to anymore. Mr. Grant patted my shoulder. You did something brave today. Don't forget that. I smiled faintly. I didn't feel brave. That's what makes it real, he said before heading off with his briefcase. I lingered, unsure of where to go next. For years, my world had been shaped by her shadow, her demands, her voice telling me what I owed. Without it, I felt both lighter and strangely untethered. On the courthouse steps, the sky stretched wide and impossibly blue. I sat down for a moment, letting the sunlight wash over me. My hands trembled, but not with fear this time, with release. Everly? I looked up to see my cousin, my aunt's daughter, Marissa, standing a few feet away. I hadn't seen her in months, not since the lawsuit began. She shifted awkwardly, her eyes darting. "I don't agree with what Mom did," she said softly, her voice carrying an edge of guilt. "But she's hurting too, you know." I sighed, my throat tight. "That doesn't excuse it, Marissa." She tried to turn my life into a receipt. Marissa nodded slowly. "I know. I hope you can move on now. For yourself." Her words settled in me, not as an apology, but as a reminder. Moving on wasn't about her. It was about me. We parted quietly, and I began the walk back to my car. Each step felt different, lighter, as though the pavement itself carried me forward. That night, back home, I placed the journal on my nightstand. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at it. For years, those pages had held my secrets, my fears, my pain. Now, they had also held my truth in the face of lies. I opened it to the last page, blank and waiting. Picking up a pen, I hesitated, then wrote. Today, I finally spoke. And today, I was heard. Tears blurred my vision, but they weren't the old kind. They weren't heavy with shame or loneliness. They were cleansing, the kind that wash wounds so healing can finally begin. Over the next few weeks, life didn't transform overnight, but it shifted. Family members who had doubted me called, their voices softer, their questions gentler. Neighbors who'd heard whispers in the community stopped me at the grocery store, offering small words of support. One evening, Mrs. Callahan, my old teacher, dropped by unexpectedly. She had testified in court, and now she stood on my porch with a smile. "I'm proud of you, Everly," she said. "I always knew you carried more strength than you let on." Her words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. Strength, not weakness, not debt, strength. Still, there were moments of emptiness, times when I sat in silence, wondering who I was without the burden of owing. The freedom was exhilarating but also frightening. For so long, my life had been defined by proving her wrong, surviving her claims, carrying her voice. One Saturday morning, I took a walk through the local park. The air smelled of cut grass, children's laughter floated from the playground, and the world seemed so alive. I sat on a bench, watching families move about. A little girl ran past me, clutching a kite string, her laughter sharp and bright. For the first time, I realized something. I didn't need to carry my childhood pain forever. I could let it go, little by little, like a kite string slipping free into the sky. That night, I cooked myself a full meal, something I rarely did. Not because I didn't know how, but because eating alone had always felt hollow. This time, though, it felt like an act of care. I lit a candle, poured a glass of iced tea, and ate in silence, savoring each bite. Later, I called my best friend, Claire. When she answered, her voice was filled with warmth. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Strange," I admitted. Like I'm finally breathing after holding my breath for years." She chuckled softly. "Then keep breathing. Everly, you've earned it." Her words lingered long after the call ended. Weeks turned into months, and though the scars of the past didn't vanish, they no longer defined me. My aunt still existed somewhere out there, probably bitter, probably spinning new stories, but her power over me was gone. One evening, as I folded laundry, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her shoulders were straighter, her eyes clearer, her expression softer. That's when I understood freedom wasn't just a verdict handed down by a judge. It was a decision I made every day to no longer let lies weigh me down, to live fully, to embrace peace. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to make that choice.